Okay, let's make a start. So, hi everyone, thanks very much indeed for joining us. We're looking forward to getting started and to reflect on challenging times for telcos, and in particular, the vendors that are supporting them and selling to them. So we're going to be looking at the impact of three major events that are all coming together at the same time. There's digital transformation programs which have been in existence now for 2 or 3 years. 5G deployment, which really kind of started in earnest about 2 years ago, and different telcos are at different stages of deployment, and the very real and the very unfortunate real-time impact of COVID-19. So what we're going to be doing is reflecting on the priorities of the telco decision maker, and we're going to be sharing their thoughts on how they think vendors can market and sell to them more effectively. We're going to be revisiting some research that we did back in 2018 into telco buying behavior, and receive first-hand confirmation from serial vendor executive Mary Clark on how the same challenges that were facing vendors back then are still very much at play today, and in fact in most, if not all instances, have actually intensified. So just need to run you through a couple of housekeeping bits before we get started. You guys are all on mute, unfortunately, so even if you wanted to tell me exactly what you think of me, you can't, sorry, but there'll be a Q&A at the end. We are going to be recording the webinar. If anybody wants a recording at the end, then just let us know. We'll be sharing our email addresses at the end, and we will get it out to you just as soon as it's edited. And also, we've got the Q&A function. If you guys have got any questions for us, then please just use the chat function as we go. And if we can access them as we go, we'll answer them as we go. If not, we'll definitely give them our attention at the end. In terms of who we are, so first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Paul Nolan. I am the COO and the head of mobile and telecoms at CCgroup. CCgroup is a B2B PR agency. One of our areas of specialism is mobile and telecoms. From a personal perspective, I've been in the industry now about 15 years, and for almost all of that time, I have supported a range of different vendors across the mobile and fixed ecosystem, position themselves more effectively to and sell to the telco. I've also dabbled in other areas, including working telco side as well, but most of what I've been doing has been vendor side. Joined by my colleague Anais. Anais, if you'd like to just introduce yourself to everybody.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Anais Merlin. I am the Deputy Head of Mobile and Telecoms at CCgroup. I've been at CCgroup for 5 years. I have experience in different areas of the mobile ecosystem, ranging from everything from 5G R&D to RCS to BSS and OSS, all the way to embedded systems and test and measurement. So wide range of experience and various client accounts. I've worked with different size companies, from small to medium enterprises, all the way to large multinational corporations. So yeah, that's me. Mary, over to you.
Sure. My name is Mary Clark, and I've been in mobile since '92 and selling to mobile operators since '95. In that experience, it's been almost exclusively services, but there are lots of scars. And I thought I might be able to help today. Most recently, I was Chief Product Officer and Chief Marketing Officer at Synchronous. Prior to that, I was at Cineverse for a long time. But I've sold to operators around the world for many years, and having really the luxury right now of being in between opportunities, I've had an awful lot of time to kind of become much more familiar and talk to a lot of people I don't really get a chance to talk to. So I'm a little, I'm feeling for everybody out there that's having to do this. So I'm really happy to be a part of this. And I'm very fortunate to have been a client of CCgroup's off and on for a long time. So I was super happy when they asked me to join today. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Mary. Okay, everyone, let's get just a couple of slides about CCgroup. I promise we'll whiz through these nice and quickly. Just to give you some context of who we are again. So we are, as I said, we're a B2B PR agency. We are based in London. We have a team of about 30 people. We've been in existence for around 30 years now. We consider ourselves to be very, very commercially focused, and we're one of the few agencies that has its own in-house analyst relations practice as well. I've talked about mobile and telecoms. It's really the vantage point that we're coming from today, but we also have areas of specialism in fintech, enterprise tech, and deep tech, and do work across a range of different verticals as well. People ask us, what do we do? Very simple, 3 things in the main. We create market awareness through media and analyst relations. We drive lead generation by creating our own content marketing campaigns, and we also help clients build value, build their own value, and position for exit, and actually attract investment as well. So that's us, out of the way. I told you we'd be quick. We'll get down to the meat of why we're all here today.
Very quick, Paul. Good job.
Thanks very much. I did make a promise. So we are looking at, first of all, we're just going to set the context. Okay, we said at the beginning that this is a period of tremendous complexity and change for the telcos around the world. It all started 2 or 3 years ago with digital transformation. 5G just compounded all of those different challenges, and COVID-19 further still. So what we wanted to do is look at how all of these 3 things have combined, and there's other things beside COVID-19 as well, which we'll get to in a few slides' time. But we just wanted to really reflect on the enormity of the challenge faced by the telcos and how that is basically impacting the vendors that are trying to sell to them. So we'll start with digital transformation. It's a hugely complex slide, and that was part of the storytelling actually, because it wanted to tell a story of complexity. Every telco around the world is looking to go from a traditional telco to a digital service provider. We actually work with the TM Forum, and we actually help them. We actually help promote a lot of the reports that they've been putting out over the last few years. And for anyone that has actually followed the TM Forum for a while will know that they are literally living the dream when it comes to digital transformation. As I said, lots and lots of telcos have been on the digital transformation journey for a couple of years now. Some are further ahead than others. And I think what we'd say is, what began as a very opportunistic thought process, just to kind of gain the odd, to affect the odd marginal gain here and there, has now actually evolved to become something which is now critical in ensuring that they remain resilient, that they stay relevant, and that they actually survive. And if you look at the 10 different journeys here, these were created by a guy called Martin Kriener in his book, Transforming the Telco, which became the subject of the TMF white paper. And by distilling 10 different journeys down, you get a sense of of the enormity of the task being faced by telcos, but also the amount of overlap that exists within the organization as well, both from a technology perspective, from a team and personnel perspective, but also from a brand identity and cultural perspective as well. So we're talking about wholesale change. Most telcos out there are literally being turned on their heads and having to learn a lot of new stuff for the very, very first time. You layer on top of that 5G. So it's important to stress that 5G is a big deal. It's a massive deal. But a lot of the technologies which telcos have actually been getting their heads around have been in existence before 5G actually launched. Some of them were actually in anticipation of supporting the requirements of 5G. Some of them weren't. Now, in most cases, the requirements of 5G itself has determined the underlying technology which is needed to deliver the different services. And telcos are having to make decisions about which technologies they invest in first to support the services they have actually decided to launch to start with. And in making the decisions on the services, they're also taking decisions about what are the brands that they ultimately want to become as well, because the services that they deliver, the content partnerships that they form, say an awful lot about them as a business, about how they want to be perceived in the minds of their customers too. So, operators are doing more than just selecting technology. They're trying to get to grips with the technology. They're trying to understand the different architectures that support new technologies, and they're trying to understand, how they need to think entirely differently to be faced with an entirely new reality that is digital first, that does revolve around partnerships with other companies, with content providers, that does involve more diversity in terms of content bundling, and also more empowerment to the customer in terms of how they can actually interface with an operator and just basically get the most value from the relationship as they possibly can. So just look at the range of different technologies and architectures and cultural decision making, in view of the new reality, on top of the 10 transformational journeys, and you can see how complexity is being layered on top of complexity. And I think a lot of telcos can be forgiven, an awful lot of head scratching at this moment in time, but it gets worse. COVID-19 has brought, even more economic chaos to every single business around the world, and the telco is no exception. Talking about falling revenues, I actually saw some statistics from Analysis Mason that said that telco service revenue itself is going to contract by between 2.5% and 5.7% this year alone. And they're not altogether sure if these losses are going to be fully recouped in future years. That means that every single board of every single telco at the moment is absolutely preoccupied with correcting their cost structures. And that unfortunately means a reduction in headcount, and we are seeing more and more telcos laying off more people, just trying to kind of keep the numbers balanced. At the same time, COVID has brought its own challenges in terms of the delay for the deployment of 5G. That has just pushed back ROI on the investments that have been made, CapEx investments, OpEx investments, which means that they're under more and more pressure to actually bring those dates forward, but they're obviously at the behest of, of different governments making decisions on when it's safe to do so. While there's an awful lot of retail outlets that are being closed, telcos have been impacted by that too. An awful lot of business is conducted in retail stores, particularly the upgrading of smartphones. Yes, they are starting to push more and more onto online channels and use e-commerce more and more. But I think there aren't many telcos that could put their hand in the air and say that they were absolutely fully prepared for a total international lockdown of retail, and they're having to kind of reorganize and reprioritize their business accordingly. Then, of course, we've got the political unrest and the issues that we've been seeing with Huawei. Although it's just the United States and the UK that have made definitive decisions not to use their technology, it has raised question marks in the minds of telcos pretty much in every country around the world. Are they at risk? Do they perceive there to be any danger? Do they need to take some sort of action to protect themselves about the perceived threat of Huawei's technology? Talked about cohesive digital strategy in view of an absence of face-to-face business on the high street or in different retail outlets. Some telcos are further ahead in transformation journeys than others. Some telcos are better placed to actually cope with the restrictions that COVID is bringing, but it's causing challenges. There isn't a single telco around that isn't being affected by the need for more digital interface for consumers. And then, telcos and vendors, and I'll get Mary's view on this in a second, they've been doing business the same way for a very, very long period of time. They have relied very much on the relationship, on the face-to-face contact, and they're traveling around the world to actually sit down with these people and discuss their problems and come up with different solutions. Whether or not they're going to face-to-face meetings, meeting at trade shows or other conferences around the world, these opportunities have been closed to all of them. And that has meant that there has been, mass unfamiliarity in both sets of organizations, which means that everybody's having to adopt new ways of getting face time, and that is bringing huge challenges. Mary, is there anything else that you just wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, the sales cycle that was already intensely too long to sell anything to an operator, regardless of its size, has just simply gotten longer. And I think the term that Paul used in talking about digital transformation as previously being looked at as opportunistic is now being treated as, okay, this is now fundamental to our resiliency in being able to get past this period and to have something to hold on to. I think what's interesting is when you go region by region and you start to break it out on sort of the number ones, the twos and threes in each market, and the fours that are struggling to figure it out. The length of the sales cycle and the lack of decision making, everyone is holding on to cash. I mean, I'm not telling any of you probably anything you don't already know, but the reality is that because of this huge emphasis on cash and the lack of decision making and the extension of the sales cycle, those selling into the operator are so compounded in terms of the headwinds and just simply getting a deal done. One of the things you're going to hear a little bit later on that I'll probably hammer a little bit later on in the webinar, which is it's so imperative to understand, the seat that they're sitting in in determining, you know, are they a number 2 in the market? What's their competitive ratio in terms of subs? What's their enterprise business? All of that is so fundamental to making sure that as they're planning out their account plans, that, you know, everybody's thinking about, how am I staying pertinent to my targets inside? What do I need to be giving them on a regular basis that's going to somehow fundamentally point a finger back to me that, you know, as a service provider, as a solution provider, I should say, I am valuable. I am different than who I am, you know, or others that I'm competing against. And so, you know, the insights-driven perspective, making sure that, you know, there's just a constant emphasis on what is that particular operator's business imperative to get through this period, and what is likely the best that you can do to figure out what are those top 3 things and how do you fit into it. But it is brutal, I think, in terms of what everybody's facing right now. So I'm really happy that this, you know, this data is just going to give us a mindset that I think is absolutely accurate for what needs to be done in order to just sell into the operators right now.
Perfect. Thanks very much. Right. So now we're all agreed that the operators are facing a somewhat chaotic landscape. Let's just have a look at, you know, the vendor impact to a lot of these things. So what we want to know is, you know, how are all these challenges affecting, you know, how telcos are structured, you know, how they're making decisions, how are they shortlisting vendors for RFPs. So what we're going to do now is we're going to reflect on some research that we did in 2018. It was designed to help empathize with vendors who were putting their hair out at the time trying to sell to operators that were in this kind of state of flux. And just to, you know, remind everybody, this is a state of flux which has got even more significant over the last couple of years. So these were changes that were brought about by, you know, digital transformation programs. But in the intervening time, we've spoken to vendor clients, we've spoken to industry friends, we've spoken to consultants to see, you know, how the landscape has changed. And they've all told us, you know, without exception, that, you know, thanks to 5G, COVID-19, etc., that operator decision making is taking even longer. So I'm going to pass over to Anais now, that's just going to run through some of the key data points from the study, just to give you some context. And it's basically us telling you what the operators told us. So Anais, over to you.
Cool. Okay, so let's start with just giving a bit of context and looking at who we surveyed. So we had 64 senior technology decision makers from different operators around the world. So the regions that we looked at were Europe and the UK, North America, Asia, and Oceania. The operator types varied, but the majority were from fixed network operators, and then we had some from MNOs, converged network operators, and then a couple from MVNOs. So that's kind of setting the context. Paul, next slide, please. So we wanted to start, as Paul said, we wanted to understand who the telco buyer really was and what they were going through and the kind of changes that they've experienced in the last few years. So as Paul has mentioned, as Mary has mentioned, you know, a lot of changes happened, and as a result, it's led to changes in leadership, changes in organizational structures. And what we saw was that 52% of the telco respondents that we surveyed have changed leadership in the last few years. And actually 72 have introduced new boards and senior management roles, which has had an impact on the telco buying process, which I'll go into in a later slide. We also saw that 77% of these telcos have restructured at least once, and some of them have restructured at least twice in the last few years, which is major change for any organization. So that's going to obviously lead to massive upheaval and just a bit of a kind of state of flux and rethinking of who they are and who they want to be. And that's led to also some rebranding and a change in market positioning. So a lot is happening, and I think what we can take away from that is that from a vendor perspective, those who are trying to reach these telcos, it's making things really difficult for them because they're having to face you know, decision makers who are constantly changing. They're in a state of flux. They don't really know what's going on. The objectives are always changing, and so it's really difficult to really understand who the buyer really is. So that's kind of how things are at the moment. So how has that impacted the telco buying process? So what we found was that, as Mary mentioned earlier, there are more people involved in the buying process, and that actually echoes the findings of our study, because actually, there's been more restructure, more roles have been added, so naturally more people are getting involved than there were before. And as a result, 73% of the telcos that we surveyed said that purchasing decisions were taking longer. So the majority of telcos nowadays are actually seeing consensus buying as a new norm. And while that may seem like the easy solution, we found in our research that on average, there are 38 people that are involved in the buying process, and it takes 45 weeks on average for it to be completed. So that's a lot of people to get through, and a lot of weeks to go through for it to be completed. And so that makes things even more difficult for vendors who are trying to target telcos, because it means that they need to reach different people at different levels who will have different needs. And sometimes these needs will be competing needs, because obviously a CFO will want different things from a CTO, and they won't necessarily want the same thing. So it makes things really, really difficult from a vendor marketer's perspective. Next, please. So then we wanted to really find out what telcos wanted to see from their vendors, bearing all this in mind, all this change is currently going on. And so we asked them the top 3 factors that were most important to them during the vendor selection process. So perhaps not surprisingly, reputation is the most popular thing, the most important thing. Naturally, as with any organization, any other industry, you want to know that the vendor you're working with is a good one, obviously. The second thing that was most important, with half of the vendors that we surveyed stating this, the second most important, was about patience and empathy. So as we mentioned, operators are going through a lot of change, and they don't necessarily know what's going to come next. And as much as we as an industry keep telling operators that they need to move quickly, it's not always easy to do so. And so they need to know that they're working with vendors that are empathetic to what they're going through, that understand the challenges that they're going through, and that can relate to them, really. A vendor that's empathetic, essentially. The other 2 things is all about differentiation, was very important. Obviously, showing that you're better than the next vendor is massively important. And the ability to speak to and engage with multiple stakeholders. So as I mentioned, there are so many more people involved in the buying process. So naturally, a one-size-fits-all approach just isn't going to work. You're going to need messages that are targeted and curated for different audiences. And those messages just can't, one message isn't going to work for a CFO, a CTO, a VP of engineering, etc. It's going to have to change based on their role, based on what they need, etc. So it's really important that marketers really look at building that reputation, understanding the challenges that telcos are facing, that they can differentiate from other vendors, and that they are able to build marketing programs that have different messages for these different stakeholders. So with all that being said, next please. With all that being said, it's kind of understanding why some vendors aren't perhaps getting it as right as they should be. Obviously, there are lots of things to think about and balance. So we also wanted to understand what the bigger frustrations were when it came to the buying process, and we wanted to know, why, what got telcos annoyed with technology vendors during the process. So some of these frustrations are very much to do with individual salespeople tactics, and that's not necessarily something that you can always control. I'm sure we've all been subject to pushy salespeople, but yeah, there are certain things that the marketing program can certainly help with and certainly alleviate. So the top frustration that came out during the survey was the lack of relevant knowledge, which is perhaps a bit worrying, actually, because as a telco, you want to know that the vendor you're bringing on board knows what they're doing, and what their expertise and their subject matter expertise is, and what experience they're bringing to the table. So that's really important. And when building marketing campaigns and marketing programs, it's really critical that marketers are able to highlight the firm's experience during that process. The second thing, and this was relevant to 41% of the respondents, was about over persistence. So again, this might be just an overly pushy salesperson, but sometimes contacting someone just for the sake of it doesn't always work, and actually it's annoying, and they want to know that you're contacting them for a reason, and that you're bringing something to the table. You're not just doing it because you thought, oh, why not, let's see what happens. So again, that can be a good way to kind of think about what you're bringing to that person when you're contacting them, and that the contact is meaningful and valuable. The third thing was around consensus buying, and again, being able to engage these stakeholders. And it goes back to having these different messages, being able to have different messages for different audiences, and demonstrate that flexibility. That's really, really key in any marketing program. And the other thing that I want to highlight on this slide is the lack of additional insight. That was a frustration for a third of telcos, and it goes back also to the too much contact. Again, contacting people without any kind of valuable insight and nothing new to say, not bringing anything to the table, it's just going to annoy people. So yeah, being able to provide some additional insight is really, really important during the marketing program. Mary, I think you want to say a few words on this.
Yeah, I'm just nodding and shaking my head, because I mean, the number of meetings that I've been in where there's just this blind belief that a sales funnel growth program that is reliant upon just how many times we can hit the same people with some sort of slightly tweaked message in a lead gen program is going to somehow magically improve what the funnel looks like. And the reality is that that's just not the case. And I love the fact that this in black and white, is something that, I, as a salesperson, you can go back in and say, hey, look, see this? They don't really like this. One of the key things that I found over the years is the triumvirate of support that needs to really exist, and the communication that needs to exist between the product marketing team, the product management team, and then the folks in marketing that are responsible for sort of making sure that the messaging is there. You got to start with, why should they talk to us? Why are we different? And how do I make it stupid simple for them to understand that they need to be going to us rather than anybody else? And sometimes getting that message across in lead gen is very difficult to do. But one of the things I think that's so interesting, one of the questions that came in is, can we qualify and be more specific about the respondents of this? If you think about to that data, and you'll get this information when you go back to the slides, a good portion of the respondents were fixed wireless, I think. Fixed mobile, what was it?
Yeah,
it was,
fixed network operators, yeah.
Fixed network operators, and then I think the next largest segment was mobile network
MNOs.
operators.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so when we think about those respondents, these are folks that are, looking to get services and hardware and everything that was mentioned in the question. But what is so important when you think about, you got to have the reputation, you've got to have a really healthy understanding of the challenges that they have, and then you got to be able to differentiate. That means you've got to start with, what's my message? Why am I different? And simply make that meet the fact that you also know why their business is so hard. What are those insights that you're bringing to them? And I think that's the key to really some of the recommendations that we have for this, which is, you've got to have the expertise, as this says, right? The lack of relevant knowledge, the lack of subject matter expertise. The flip side of that is, what are the insights you're bringing to bear? And how do you bring that back in through the entire communications channel that you have with that target? The best thing that we have in some respects about, this particular industry is, it's not as if we're dealing with consumer marketing, right? There is the opportunity to really build some decent content marketing here that is, got some focus to it. And it's, as much as, you get stuck in the conversation of, more, what is it, quality versus quantity? It is absolutely about quality. And in the end, it's going to be the key. So the quality of those insights is going to be the way to fight against this. And then just making it so stupid simple on what's the differentiation. So lots of pain on those conversations for sure. Go ahead, Annie.
No, that was it. That's it. Yeah.
Okay, I think it's back to me now. So after Anais and Mary have gone to great lengths to tell every single vendor out there how hard their lives are and what a mess they've made of it so far, I thought it was appropriate that we actually start giving you some good news that you can actually, some information that you can use to improve the situation for yourselves. So an interesting question that we asked was, okay, what are the marketing channels that telcos found most influential when selecting vendors for RFPs? And we sent them a whole list of options and we asked them to kind of rank them in terms of importance. And to be honest, we're a little bit surprised by the findings in that the trade media publications came out top by some distance, actually. And digging down into those findings, we found, that telcos found the opportunity to read objective commentary from knowledgeable journalists on technological and market developments was extremely useful. They also enjoyed the fact that they had a chance to actually be able to see which vendors were having commercial success against their peers by the nature of the news cycle and how many deals they're announcing, the partnerships that they're announcing. And then also the chance to objectively read thought leadership content as well and really get a sense on a vendor by vendor perspective, how they thought the future of the markets in which they were actually operating and were actually going to be moving in. Okay, so where would they likely take an operator, were they to actually work together? And it struck us that the nature of editorial license means that to gain column inches these days, vendors have got to demonstrate the same qualities that telcos look for in the vendors themselves. So going back to what Anais said earlier, we're talking about strong reputation, we're talking about effective differentiation, and we're talking about a track record of success, as well as the understanding and the empathy for the telco challenge. And you can share all of this type of content or all of these messages through earned media if you get your pitch right and if you apply it to industry dynamics and if you resist the temptation to be ultimately self-serving and only talk about your own business and your own products, because that, as we all know, will get you nowhere fast. The second on the list, industry analysts. Now, we weren't surprised by this at all, actually. We've seen firsthand that analysts are growing in influence. They are working more and more with the telco community across doing a range of different things, including helping with the sourcing of different vendors and making recommendations in terms of the technologies that they should be looking at, they should be trialing. Then there's also competitive intelligence and looking at the market landscape, looking at customized research of any particular element of technology or any particular opportunity that they want to delve into a little bit more deeply. The point is that because there is so much unknown about digital transformation, about 5G and about to a lesser extent COVID-19, they are looking to trusted third parties more and more, and the analyst community are really kind of coming into their own at this precise moment in time. So with that being true, it's never been more important that vendors ensure that the analyst community have as up-to-date a view of you as a vendor as possible. With so much change, so much M&A, so much convergence, so many new entrants from new parts, from new areas coming in from the IT world, coming in from the cloud computing world. It's really important that vendors are clear about the spaces in which they want to operate, because it's becoming more and more critical for vendors to move outside of the worlds that they've been traditionally known for and trying to diversify into other parts of the network or other parts of the service delivery ecosystem. And analysts need to understand that. So when they're advising their telco clients, they're doing you justice and they're actually referring to you in the ways that you want to be referred to by. And then moving further down, some of the things that you'd expect, right? The peer network, known contacts. I mean, the Rolodex of salespeople have been phenomenally important for such a long period of time, and that's not just going to go away. But as I said to you before, those relationships and those contacts are going to be coming under more and more pressure from lots and lots of competitive forces that are coming into the market from lots and lots of different areas. And, you know, telcos are being forced to think a lot more widely and a lot more broadly. So I think it's important that, you know, vendors are ready for that, and that they're able to ensure that they are as ready for partnerships with these new entrants as they are to defend themselves against them. Talked about events. We've had a bit of news today about a moving Mobile World Congress to the summer of next year. Fingers crossed that happens. Events will always have their place. You know, I think we've all, and I've certainly missed it, and I never thought I'd say that, massively missed being in Barcelona the earlier part of the year. It really is a hugely valuable experience to network with, you know, with your peers in the industry, to book face-to-face meetings with prospects and customers and partners. And there's no surprise that vendors actually have invested so much supporting Mobile World Congress in previous years. However, this year has provided a welcome, well, I say a welcome break, depending on what your perspective is. It's given vendors the opportunity to try different things. And I think it's been a positive experience for most so far, not only, you know, considering how much money they potentially be saving, but looking at different marketing channels and the value that they can deliver to a vendor in catching telco attentions. And then the last few business media publications, the websites of the vendors themselves, and, you know, social media falls quite lowly down. And remember, this is specifically linking to the influence of the RFP process, not in terms of social media as a tool to boost awareness and reputation. So, you know, I think we're all agreed that that is a percentage which is only going to rise over the coming months and years. But plenty to think about, however. So, all of this being considered, what are our recommendations? Well, I think we'll all agree that you need to get your messaging sorted. If Anais is talking about 38 different people being involved in a particular sales meeting about any particular vendor, it's really, really important that you have diversified messaging to appeal to the different personas that are going to be part of that decision-making process, and really think about, you know, how a technology or approach or a service or, you know, whatever it is you're providing is going to alleviate pressure and challenges that they face. The prioritization of media relations to make the most of, you know, the influence of the trade media is going to be important, you know, through trade media relations programs. Recognizing the importance of industry analysts for all the reasons I described a short moment ago, all about focusing on developing awareness and an understanding of your areas of differentiation and where you currently are as a business, so that they can appropriately inform their telco clients. And Mary touched on this a moment ago as well, actively supporting sales teams. I think when we sit at the outset, when I described CCgroup as a commercially minded PR agency, I think that was trying to highlight our preoccupation of trying to understand the link between strategic communications and sales enablement and lead generation. And we've seen firsthand over the years that if you can kind of use insight and think carefully about the problem that a vendor helps a telco solve, there are some very interesting things that you can do to reframe that particular problem and point it in a direction that leaves the vendor solution as the ideal solution to a given problem. And it's something we've done an awful lot. And it's not so much about highlighting all of the advantages that a vendor would get an operator would get working with a particular vendor. It's much more interesting to actually look at it from the perspective of what are the dangers should an operator choose not to work with a particular vendor, given all of the value we place around a certain, you know, modus operandi way of working. And, you know, you can use data and insights in a way that, you know, kind of leave the vendor solution in a particularly compelling way that forces some kind of action. And in terms of content marketing campaigns, from our perspective, that means the creation of a central, you know, piece of content, to use, you know, earned media for the promotion of that content, to have that content stored behind gates on a website where you're, you know, forcing or encouraging, should I say, telcos to leave their contact information when they're actually downloading it from a website, all of a sudden, this is pretty standard from a kind of marketing perspective, but if you combine it with the power of the earned media and actually lean on the strength of and the influence of the trade media and put the two things together, you've got a very, very powerful combination.
Yeah, let me jump in here, Paul. Yeah, let me give, depending upon the role that you have in listening to us in your day-to-day job, what I'm about to say may or may not sound like news to you, but one of the biggest challenges that as a solution provider, as a vendor, is what is the new thing that I can arm my salesperson and my marketing teams with that gives us a new reason to reach back out to those well-developed and cultivated contacts that are out there. And, you're not going to get any media coverage if you've got a new feature. You're barely going to get any new coverage if you've got a new product, unless you're putting out a brand new phone. And, so often I absolutely have sat down with CCgroup in the past, and we've been very successful in creating a perspective. Sometimes I'd start with and brainstorm on, okay, I want to be able to say the following sentence to a prospect. And I'd love to be able to expand on that sentence that makes some claim about how much money is left on the table if you don't do X, or how much value is in doing Y. What's the big number? We used to talk about it. What's the big number that we could come up with? And we would do some research to come up with that. Sometimes it would use data that we had in-house that we would then combine with other third-party data, or we would do surveys to then combine with other third-party data. And that was always so great, because once we had, what did we want to say? And then we could figure out, how do we want to get the information, the insights that are going to allow us to say that? Then we can figure out, okay, what channels do we want to use? Well, we could use, everything that's listed here. It could go to earned media. It could be a part of lead gen. It could be a part of social media campaigns. And it could also help us speak to industry analysts in a slightly different way. So as you think about the real burden that I think so many have in the industry today is, it's so difficult. There's not a lot of cash. There's not a lot of innovation that, R&D can be put to work, because simply, a lot of people are holding on to cash. And so you're limited on, the engine running and being at regular speed. And so therefore, what do you have to say to someone new? And so I'm a huge believer in these insight-led content marketing campaigns. I mean, with CCgroup, we've had a lot of success with this, and have used it to create both sales funnel as well as great earned media coverage, because it gives you something to speak about, and it's got to be, and it can't be we are so great because, right? It's got to be something that is thought-provoking, that is associated with what is happening in the industry or that specific sector at that time. So it can't be so completely self-serving that it's, obviously a sham. So you gotta manage that internal stakeholder stuff. But it is fundamental, I think, right now to make sure that that's kind of forefront of the activity that's, being discussed inside of the marketing and product marketing teams, because that gives you something new to talk about. And it gives you something that, I've done it myself, where we've done some content work that was focused on Western Europe. And then we kind of did the same thing and focused on North America. Then we turned and did something that was all on, AP. And it was really great, because it gave us in each market something new to say. It gave us, another reason to knock on the door, another email to send that had relevance. And I just think it's imperative that right now, as I can't take anybody out to dinner, which is crushing me. And, I can't get on a plane and go see people. And, I think we're all feeling really constrained. So how do we find that creative way of changing that dynamic? And I'm a huge believer in this one, in just kind of tweaking and changing the conversations. And how do you change that conversation to something that's new, that's relevant, and that's also timely, and provides those insights, and also reinforces your expertise and your differentiation. So critical recommendation, I think.
Thanks, Mary. Okay, to conclude, if you guys are thinking, well, that sounds interesting, but you're scratching your heads in terms of not knowing where to start, then we have an offer for you. We are launching a series of, and I'm going to catch my breath before I say this, CCgroup COVID comms clinics. Sorry, apologise for the gratuitous alliteration. But
Never gratuitous.
This is in recognition of the fact it's been an extremely challenging 5 months for telco marketers, both internally and externally. But we've also seen that, you know, traffic to telecoms trade media has actually rocketed during the lockdown and periods where people haven't been able to travel. So, you know, from our perspective, you know, operators are definitely reading more and researching more. So opportunity beckons for vendors out there at this moment in time. So if you guys want to spend an hour or so with us to brainstorm some solutions to any problems you've currently got, then this is an open offer from us to you. I'll share our email addresses in a sec. Tell us your problem. We'll jump on the phone, interrogate it, and see if we can, you know, suggest a way forward for you in these challenging times. That is basically the end of the presentation. We've
got a question here, Paul, that's come in, which is great. Yeah.
Email addresses on screen as promised, just so I can demonstrate I am a man of my word. Mary, are you going to be quizmaster with the questions?
Sure. Yeah, the question that's just come in, as trade media publications came across as the most prominent channel for the influence of buying decisions, do telcos then therefore actually differentiate between the pay-to-play versus the organic, proper journalistic publications that write content on merit? Great question. Go ahead, Paul.
Do we answer this as a PR
I know I've got an opinion on this.
Yeah, do we answer as a PR purist, or just give the answer that you'd expect us to give? In truth, it's not a question that we asked. You know, when we're talking about the trade media, we were talking about the trade media as, you know, in its entirety, right? And I think most people, and I think everybody, would certainly be able to differentiate between paid opportunities and genuine editorial. It's becoming increasingly easy to identify, you know, to differentiate the two. Actually, the trade media are actually being a little bit more considered when actually marking the content channels they have a little bit more appropriately. I obviously, as a PR purist, would say that editorial license is everything. You know, that kind of objectivity is ultimately what most vendors will crave. I don't think you can really get thought leadership position when you're paying for a platform, when you don't have any kind of scrutiny on what it is that you're saying, or have any of your arguments challenged by one of those kind of knowledgeable journalists that you have to curry favour with more often than not. And they are a cynical bunch, and they do require a very specific and measured approach, you know, in order to kind of give them what they're after, you know, and not waste their time and be positioned as, you know, a source of high quality content and high quality insight. So I think, you know, to get the most out of the trade media, you need to appeal to editorial license, and you need to be prepared to sometimes not hear what you want to hear in terms of the arguments that you're trying to make. But working with the right kind of partner means that you're going to get more success than you're going to get failures.
Well, and I want to add something else. I have been on the receiving end many times for emails that have come from the head of sales, the head of a particular region, my CEOs, my, you know, chief commercial officers that are just like, should we do this? You know, and they will have gotten some email from somebody that is buried way down in the third paragraph is, you know, $20,000 for the first publication, or, you know, please speak to our, you know, sales representative for blah, blah, blah. And they haven't gotten all the way down there. What they're seeing is it has this kind of distribution and it has this kind of publication, and you have to end up educating. My personal point of view on this is earned media, or as you've described in this, organic, proper journalistic publications that write content on merit, is absolutely the thing to be pursuing. It has always been my number one pinnacle objective. Almost nothing else, from my point of view, is as valuable, because they are intensely, intensely skeptical, and they get flooded with useless press releases all the time that have absolutely no relevance, interest, or just nonsense. And they will tell you that. So I really appreciate this question, because a pay-to-play publication, I think, is helpful if there is a specific, you know, if it's a thread within your overall communications approach where you want to take, say, that insight-driven content, and you want to have another avenue with which to publicate it, you know, to push it and publish it. I think that there's a place for that if you've got the kind of content. But if you're looking to put forward your CEO or your CTO or your CIO as the person that's, you know, really is your thought leader for the organization, I just really think that the better thing to be doing is spending the time to figure out, what do we have to say? Is it newsworthy? And can we get to some earned media coverage? Personal opinion. We got another question in, Paul.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to just add something to that, because I'm very aware of the fact that we've got an awful lot of friends that actually work in the trade media, and they would say, "Oi, why not spend some money with us?" And I think you've kind of touched on.
Well,
it.
that's yeah.
There are different
Exactly.
tools that deliver more value than others, and I think you know, video in particular, right? There's an awful lot of high quality, you know, video outlets out there. So if you wanted to do stuff with partners or have virtual panels or whatever, and you wanted to demonstrate your insight and connectedness to a larger audience, then that's a very effective way to do it. You know, obviously,
I think that answers the question that just came in, Paul. I'm sorry to interrupt you. This is an interesting question. It says, you're a reimagined vendor. It says, with lots of insights and tons of expertise, but no customer case studies or results yet that can bring your new value prop to life. So have been there. I so understand where you are. How can media relations help at this point? So this is where you have to say, I don't have a product or a customer yet, but I need earned media coverage. So this is where you do first party content research. It's the best thing you can come up with, in my perspective. You're working with somebody like CCgroup, you create a survey, you look to see if you can get data associated with whatever you're solving. Can you get first party information from the prospective buyer of what you've got that relates to the problem that you are solving, and somehow bring that back in to what Paul talked about as, what's the cost of inaction of addressing that particular problem that you're solving? And how do I, you know, essentially almost bring to life a pro forma customer case study? Just like, okay, if they had done this, right, they would have been able to save this, make this, whatever the case is. But my immediate reaction is first party research then becomes your content marketing. And then you get somebody like these guys to call the media relations and start working the media relations. Like, look, we've got some results. We actually talked to prospects and have some, you know, data that we can share. Best thing that I would recommend.
Cost of inaction or the dangers of the status quo, whichever one you want to choose. They both have a place.
We've got another one, Paul. 2 questions. What has more impact in your view, video content versus written content? And given, as you suggest, that operators are doing more research than ever, do you think that telling customer stories resonates more with operators than more theoretical content? Well, if you've got the customer content, it's, yeah, the bottom line is the use case is always going to be better. The case study, I should say, the case study. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are, Paul. And from my point of view, you do both video and written. Don't ever assume it's one or the other. If you can afford to do both, do both. So that would be my recommendation.
I think everything has its place, but I will agree that, you know, the been there and done it factor and working hand in hand with the customer to deliver significant results should always kind of take precedent, I would argue, purely because it's so difficult to get hold of that. And it's the eternal problem that all of our clients face. How do you maintain visibility when you've got no news? And Mary's touched on it already, that content marketing can be an effective way forward. But, you know, there is a time and place for written stuff. There is the same for video. And I think the most effective marketers are the ones that are able to kind of mix them all up and go for a kind of a omni-channel approach, because they all serve different purposes, especially when you really want to focus how really strong a particular relationship with the customer is. And there really is only one way to do that effectively, and that's either through video stuff or to get them on stage at a trade conference and have combined speaking opportunities as well.
Yeah, no question. These are really great questions, you guys. I hope we're hitting them. This is terrific.
Are there any more, Quizmaster?
I think, well, we're at 3 minutes of. I think there's probably a question came in that's really kind of what's happening right now. Can you tell us more about the increased readership during lockdown. From a media point of view, I think is what they're referring to. That there's more readers out there than before.
Sure.
So maybe briefly, Paul, you can hit that. It's
Yeah,
11:58.
This was, during the lockdown period, we obviously tried to look for different ways to maintain contact with our friends in the trade media, and we had a whole bunch of different Zoom calls where we all got together and had a good chat. And anecdotally, a lot of the guys were telling us that their readership was increasing by 20 to 25%, during that particular period, and sometimes it was going upwards of 30 or 40%. So we're seeing significant increases of people actually having time on their hands and actually, doing the reading that they probably always wanted to do. And it really did. Well, it didn't raise a few eyebrows, but it was really great that all of the guys that were spending all their time writing all of these stories were getting more and more following and getting more and more traction. And I think old habits are increasingly dying hard, and we don't know how long it's going to take before we're allowed to start traveling the world again and start hitting commutes and all that kind of thing. So, there is a chance, there is an opportunity, for all the vendors out there to make the most of it, and that's why we'd encourage you to really think about it.
Okay.
I think we're at time.
I think we're good.
I think
Okay.
we are.
We're at time. Yep,
Well,
that's great.
I thoroughly enjoyed that, and thank you to everybody for joining. As I said, here are our email addresses and contact details should you want to do any follow-up with us afterwards. I just wanted to say a massive thank you to Anais and to Mary for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed what we had to say. And if you didn't, again, there's my email address.
There you go. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.